few more definitions. It says worship is an outward action, a display, something you do of an inward reaction, faith. When something gets you or stirs you to have a reaction, which is praise. Worship is the driving force in every single thing we do. It is how we declare what is most important to us and what we value. And so today, I want you guys to be encouraged, okay? If you are maybe newly walking with the Lord, your worship all of our worship is going to look different, okay, first of all. Second of all, maybe you are newer to being in church, or maybe you weren't raised around this. Your worship may look different. And so that is one thing, that's the premise of what I'm going to say today in this series, is that you know if you are being challenged in your worship. And if you're not being challenged in your worship, I challenge you in your worship. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So Matthew 6:21, it says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be. Psalms 96:9, worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. Tremble before him, all the earth. It doesn't say some, it says all. Psalms 34:1, I will worship the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. It doesn't say his praise will be on my lips when I get a bunch of money. It doesn't say my praise will always be, or his praise will always be on my lips when I feel like it. It says at what? All times. So even when we're going through something, even when we feel discouraged, his praise, which should be always on our lips. And ultimately, everything we do in this life should be unto God. And so our very bodies, our very beings is worship to the Lord. And that's why it is important that we have standards in our life. Right? So, we won't go there. We'll stay on topic. John 11. So we have quite a bit of scripture today. If you could see it, great. If not, you guys can open up your Bibles. But it says, now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, the Lord, the one you love, is sick. And for those, I don't want to confuse people. When you read your Bible, if it's in red, it's most likely because Jesus said something. When I do it, it's because I want to emphasize something. Okay? When he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago, the Jews that tried to stone you, and yet you are going back. Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. So whoever says that you can't be sarcastic, that's a lie, because Jesus literally answered a question with a question. He was sarcastic. So people tell me that, don't be sarcastic. Well, Jesus was sarcastic. Okay. After he had said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. They didn't fully understand what Jesus was talking about. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. Then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. Then Thomas said to the rest of the disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. So they're really not hearing. And sometimes in our walk with the Lord, we have to learn to hear God, right? Because we can look at present circumstances and try to translate it, and we got to actually open up our ears to hear him. And then it goes on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had been already in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? So remember, Jesus had already promised Mary and Martha, sisters, that their brother would be risen from the dead, or raised from the dead. And he's been dead for 4 days, so we would all have doubt. Yes, Lord, she replied, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. After that she said this, she went and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. And when Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And when Jesus saw her weeping, the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him? But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? So Jesus had already performed miracles. And so they're saying, if he was able to do all this stuff, why can't he do this? And Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there for 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and cloth around his face. And Jesus said to them, take the grave clothes and let him go. And so God raises this dead man that was dead for 4 days. And we see that these two sisters, they go to God and saying, hey God, my brother is dead. So they're crying out for something, right? They're petitioning God or Jesus and saying, Jesus, I need this breakthrough. I need this healing. And in verse 20, it says that Mary stood home. It doesn't say why. Possibly because she was grieving, right? Some people grieve in different ways. Maybe she wanted to be alone. Maybe she didn't truly believe in what God had promised. Remember, her brother had been dead for 4 days already. She had a lack of belief. And in verse 32, when you fast forward, they said that some of the men went and said, hey, Jesus wants to see you, Mary. So she gets up and she goes. And I couldn't help but think, because it says that as soon as they got her, she got up quickly and went. So something happened between her staying home and going quickly. And sometimes I thought that's like in our own lives, right? We get maybe discouraged. We're looking at the present circumstance. But there's that little thing in our life that we're saying, okay, maybe it's this time. Maybe if I just have a little bit of hope, a little bit of belief. And in verse 32, it says, Mary falls at the feet of Jesus. When she arrives to Jesus, she falls at the feet of Jesus. And although she does question him, because she said, God, Jesus, you told me you were going to raise him up from the dead. Although she did question him, her falling at his feet was a sign of humility and honor. When we bow down, when we get on our knees, it's a sign of honor. We look at that, if you study history, or if you look at maybe European countries or people that still have royalty, they still get on a knee. When you ask someone to marry you, you get on a knee. It's a sign of honor and humility. And so that's what Mary does. And I believe that that was a form of worship. That even though she didn't see what God had promised yet, even though she was human and she questioned things like we all do at times, we all question stuff. She knew that all she could do was sit at Jesus' feet. Could we be a people who come before God even when circumstances look horrible? When that miracle or breakthrough looks impossible, can we still worship even when it looks like God isn't moving? Throughout this text, the disciples are watching. Throughout the text, right? They're with Jesus. Then when Jesus goes to Martha and Mary, they're right there. They are watching Jesus and Mary and Martha. And we're going to talk about their role that they play. But some of you, there are people watching you. They're watching you if you're really sold out for this God that you talk about. Or when you talk about him, are you really going to walk it out when crap hits the fan? They're watching you. I want to give another definition, and it's the next slide. Worship. The word is derived from the Old English. I don't know how to say that. Okay, but it's a word. Meaning to honor. Worship, honor, shown to an object, which has been etymologized as worthiness or worthship. To give at its simplest, worth to something. So worship is worthship. Giving worthy to something. Our worship is giving worth to something. I want you to catch that. John 12, it says 6 days before the Passover. Next slide, Vincent. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. So Lazarus is already risen from the dead. Now they're going to have a fiesta. Martha served while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took a pint of pure nard, an expensive type of perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But one of his disciples, Judas, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. And you may say, well, what does that have to do with anything? That the perfume that's worth wages, not only was it customary in that time, perfume was very expensive and there was ways to do things, but it was also taught by the Pharisees, which were the religious scholars. These are people that went to like Bible college, people that, you know, were pure and holy and apparently did everything right and there was no wrong to them. That's what they would teach. So Judas was taught this, and so he's saying it. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As a keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. So he's using religious terminology, Christianese, to say, hey, this is how we've always done it, but there's a hidden agenda. And then Jesus replies, leave her alone. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. So the disciples saw the journey of Mary. They saw when Mary went, right? When her and Martha said, hey God, Jesus, I need you to heal my brother. The disciples were there. They saw Jesus heal Lazarus firsthand. Seeing her come and throw herself at Jesus' feet. They saw that. Yet in verse 4 through 6, they still judged her. The disciples judged Mary about how she was doing this perfume and washing Jesus' feet. And this is a representation of worship again. That Mary is taking the time to honor the Lord. What does worship mean? To honor. She was giving Jesus what he was worth because she had an encounter with him. Right? She cried out to God. Even though she went through disbelief, he fulfilled his promise. She had an encounter with him. You guys following me? So you will never understand what somebody does or their actions if you don't know their story. The woman is doing something that others see as wasteful. They saw, Judas said it, why are you wasting the perfume? Why didn't you sell it? But that was actually her way of worship. That was her giving of her best. We should not judge another's worship. We don't know what they have been through. You don't know what they are contending for. Truly, the disciples had not experienced for themselves what Mary had experienced. It's easy to spectate. It's easy to sit there and watch everyone else and judge everyone else. Why are they raising their hands? Why is he jumping up and down? Why are they picking up a flag? Why are they yelling? It's easy to do that. But you have no idea the story or the what those people are giving worth to.
All right. It's good. It's good.
This woman knew the grace of God. Worship says, God, you are worthy. She now at Jesus' feet when her brother had been dead for 4 days. She was still worshiping him even when she doubted. Are we going to be people that worship even when we have doubt in our mind? When all hell is breaking loose, are we still going to come and worship before the Lord? Both in church and in our homes.
Yes.
When our boss is driving us crazy, are we still going to worship God?
All right.
When we get that doctor report, are we still going to worship God? When we want to strangle that person, are we still going to want to worship God? Right?
Praise God. Yes.
Don't look at me, Michael.
Worship is what God is worth to you.
Yes.
It was so natural for Mary to pour something out that was of value because she had experienced who God was. She experienced God raised her brother from the dead. Mary is giving her best because God saw her through the hardest place of her life. The one who stood by her side. She gives out because of what he had done in her life.
Yes.
See, the disciples looked at Mary's act as weird, not normal, not traditional. Are you giving God your best? I can't judge that. That's between you and the Lord.
Yes.
But what I will say, majority of the times, this isn't a judgment, but majority of times, I heard a preacher say something along these lines that I could tell what you value by the way you worship. So if you value what God is doing in your life or has done in your life or what you need him to do in your life, but you aren't worshiping him in your home, then do you really value him? Right? And again, we're all at different levels of our walk with God. So maybe this is your first time really coming to church and you're like, hey, this is new for me, but I'm going to start singing the lyrics. Guess what? You're giving God your best. Well, maybe now I'm going to raise my hands. As long as you're giving God your best. I'm not one to judge you. But what I will say, if you've been in any amount of time walking with the Lord, I do want to kind of judge you. Okay? Because to me, if you've been walking with the Lord for 10, 6, 20 years, and we're worshiping, and we're saying, God, we want to seek you, and you're looking like this, do you really value God? Because he deserves all the glory and the honor.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does.
I don't care if there's a band up here, if we're having glitches, if you're hearing Vincent sing and it's distracting you. I don't know. Okay? But if you look like you don't want to be here before the king, then to me that would tell me that you aren't really placing value in him. And I'm talking for the mature people. If this is your first rodeo, then God gives you grace and he's going to show you what your worship should look like. But if you're just standing here, when we're singing that song saying, Hal lost another one, do we realize what that lyric says? That we all used to be bound. There was at one point where we were headed to hell. But because by God's grace and mercy, but guess what we're doing? Hal lost another one. Well, dang, I sure hope you ain't getting to heaven with that look. Right? And I'm not saying you got to be jumping up and down like me, but maybe that's your best. Maybe that's your best. I'm pretty charismatic in how I worship. I really don't give a rip what anybody thinks. But I've been in some places where they're a little crazy for me. And sometimes you're like, dude, that person's nuts. Like, they're on something, right? Like, come on now. But guess what? And I do that sometimes when I'm in different places. But guess what? I have to remember, I don't know what their story is, but they're giving worth to something that they're either believing for or what God has done. And I also have to remember when I see a new person come in and they're just singing, or maybe they raise their hands, God, they're giving worth to something. That is their best. Why don't we play that video?
Worship stalker. Y'all need to know this. She looks around the church for people who are worshiping, and then she just watches y'all. She told me about one of you. You're in the room right now, but I'm not going to call you out by name. She's like, there's this one, at first it sounded kind of sketchy when she said, there's this one man in the church that I love to watch him when he worships. Maybe he needs to go to Forest Hill or something like that, you know what I'm saying? But she would see this particular person. He's in the church right now. I'm just not going to look anywhere near him. But it wasn't like that. She said, no matter what song we're singing, it's not like a preference thing. There would just be, I look at him, he's just crying. And it wasn't like he wasn't one of these, he didn't bring a praise banner into the church or a shofar, he didn't like grow up. He didn't understand all of the protocol of it. But she was so moved when she saw how much worship meant to him. Because, at the same time, you got somebody like sneaking in the back because they didn't want to really have to deal with the hassle of checking their kids in, so they time it just right to come there and eat kids. Then they slip out during the invitation. He wasn't like that. He'd be standing in line so he could get close to the front, and then he would just cry through the whole worship set. And he didn't do like this, like, I don't like this song. Why are they singing that over and over again? I don't understand. Okay, there's nothing better than him. No, there's nothing, okay? I get it, there's nothing. What do you want me to do? But he would just cry. When she found out his testimony, what he had been through, she got it. Once she understood the depth.
What are we giving to God? So there's three things that we're going to go over real quick. There are three keys to our worship that we could learn from this passage. The first one is sacrificial worship. Mary took a pound of very costly oil and anointed the feet of Jesus in the midst of supper. This was a remarkable gift because perfume or fragrance was very expensive during that time. Not many people had it, and if you did, you saved up years for it. It wasn't unusual to wash the feet of a guest, but it was unusual to do it during the meal itself. To use very costly oil to do it, and to wipe the feet with her hair, using the hair as a kind of towel. Mary's gift was remarkably extreme. She used a lot of very costly oil. It was extreme because God met her in an extreme circumstance. God performed an extreme miracle. So guess what? She said, God, I'm going to respond in my worship in an extreme fashion. I'm going to give my best. Judas believed that this oil was worth 300 denarii, and that's in verse 5. And that was worth a year's wages. So can you